Chapter 6 of Book 1 of Prior Analytics by Aristotle, translated by Octavius Owen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 6 of Syllogisms in the Third Figure. When with the same thing one is present with every, but the other with no individual, or both with every, or with none, such I call the third figure, and the middle in it I call that of which we predicate both, but the predicates the extremes, the greater extreme being the one more remote from the middle, and the less that which is nearer to the middle. But the middle is placed beyond the extremes, and is last in position. Now neither will there be a perfect syllogism, even in this figure, but there may be one, when the terms are joined to the middle, both universally and not universally. Now, when the terms are universally so, when, for instance, P and R are present with every S, there will be a syllogism, so that P will necessarily be present with some certain R. For since an affirmative is convertible, S will be present to a certain R. Wherefore, since P is present to every S, but S to some certain R, P must necessarily be present with some R, for a syllogism arises in the first figure. We may also make the demonstration through the impossible, and by exposition. For if both are present with every S, if some S is assumed, e.g. N, both P and R will be present with this. Wherefore, P will be present with a certain R, and if R is present with every S, but P is present with no S, there will be a syllogism, so that P will be necessarily inferred as not present with a certain R. For the same mode of demonstration will take place, the proposition R, S being converted. This may also be demonstrated by the impossible, as in the former syllogisms. But if R is present with no S, but P with every S, there will not be a syllogism. Let the terms of presence be animal, horse, man, but of absence, animal, inanimate, man. Example 1. Every man is an animal. No man is a horse. Every horse is an animal. Every man is an animal. No man is inanimate. Nothing inanimate is a horse. Neither when both are predicated of no S will there be a syllogism. Let the terms of presence be animal, horse, inanimate, but of absence, man, horse, inanimate, the middle, inanimate. Example 2. Nothing inanimate is an animal. Nothing inanimate is a horse. Every horse is an animal. Nothing inanimate is a man. Nothing inanimate is a horse. no horse is a man. Wherefore, also in this figure, it is evident when there will, and when there will not be a syllogism, the terms being universal, for when both terms are affirmative, there will be a syllogism in which it will be concluded that extreme is with a certain extreme, but when both terms are negative, there will not be. When, however, one is negative and the other affirmative, and the major is negative, but the other affirmative, there will be a syllogism, that the extreme is not present with a certain extreme, but if the contrary, there will not be. If indeed one be universal in respect to the middle, and the other particular, both being affirmative, syllogism is necessarily produced, whichever term be universal. For if R is present with every S, but P with a certain S, P must necessarily be present with a certain R. For since the affirmative is convertible, S will be present with a certain P, so that since R is present to every S, and S with a certain P, R will also be present with a certain P, wherefore also P will be present with a certain R. Again, if R is present with a certain S, but P is present with every S, P must necessarily be present with a certain R. For the mode of demonstration is the same, and these things may be demonstrated like the former, both by the impossible and by exposition. If, however, one be affirmative and the other negative, and the affirmative be universal, when the minor is affirmative, there will be a syllogism, for if R is present with every S, and P not present with a certain S, P must also necessarily not be present with a certain R, since if P is present with every R, and R with every S, P will also be present with every S, but it is not present, and this may also be shown without deduction, if some S be taken with which P is not present. But when the major is affirmative, there will not be a syllogism, e.g., if P is present with every S, but R is not present with a certain S, let the terms of being universally present with be animate, man, animal. Example 3. Every animal is animate. Some animal is not a man. Every man is animate. But it is not possible to take the terms of universal negative if R is present with a certain S, and with a certain S is not present, since if P is present with every S, and R with a certain S, P will also be present with a certain R, but it was supposed to be present with no R. Therefore we must assume the same as in the former syllogisms. As to declare something not present with a certain thing is indefinite, so that also which is not present with any individual, it is true to say, is not present with a certain individual. But not being present with any, there was no syllogism, therefore it is evident there will be no syllogism. But if the negative term be universal, yet the particular affirmative, when the major is negative, but the minor affirmative, there will be a syllogism. For if P is present with no S, but R is present with a certain S, P will not be present with a certain R. And again, there will be the first figure, the proposition R, S being converted, but when the minor is negative, there will not be a syllogism. Let the terms of presence be animal, man, wild, but of absence, animal, science, wild. The middle of both, wild. Example 4. Something wild is an animal. Nothing wild is a man. Every man is an animal. Something wild is an animal. Nothing wild is science. No science is an animal. Nor will there be a syllogism when both are negative, the one universal, the other particular. Let the terms of absence when the minor is universal as to the middle be animal, science, wild. Of presence, animal, man, wild. Example 5. Something wild is not an animal. Nothing wild is science. No science is an animal. Something wild is not an animal. Nothing wild is a man. Every man is an animal. When, however, the major is universal, but the minor particular, let the terms of absence be crow, snow, white. Example 6. Nothing white is a crow. Not everything white is snow. No snow is a crow. But of presence we cannot take the terms. If R is present with some S, and with some is not present, since if P is present with every R, but R with some S, P will also be present with some S, but it was supposed to be present with no S. Indeed, it may be proved from the indefinite. Neither if each extreme be present or not present with a certain middle, will there be a syllogism, or if one be present and the other not, or if one be with some individual and the other with not every, or indefinitely. But let the common terms of all be animal, man, white, animal, inanimate, white. Example 7. Something white is not an animal. Something white is not a man. Every man is an animal. Something white is not an animal. Something white is not inanimate. Nothing inanimate is an animal. Wherefore it is clear in this figure also when there will and when there will not be a syllogism, and that when the terms are disposed, as we have stated, a syllogism of necessity subsists, and that there should be a syllogism, it is necessary that the terms should be thus. It is also clear that all syllogisms in this figure are imperfect, for they are all perfected by certain assumptions, and that an universal conclusion, either negative or affirmative, cannot be drawn from this figure. Chapter 7. Of the first three figures, and of the completion of incomplete syllogisms. In all the figures it appears that when a syllogism is not produced, both terms being affirmative or negative, and particular, nothing in short results of a necessary character. But if the one be affirmative and the other negative, the negative being universally taken, there is always a syllogism of the minor extreme with the major. For example, if A is present with every or with some B, but B is present with no C, the propositions being converted, C must necessarily not be present with some A. So also in the other figures, for a syllogism is always produced by conversion. Again, it is clear that an indefinite taken for a particular affirmative will produce the same syllogism in all the figures. Moreover, it is evident that all incomplete syllogisms are completed by means of the first figure, for all of them are concluded either ostensively or per impossible, but in both ways the first figure is produced, being ostensively completed. The first figure is produced because all of them were concluded by conversion, but conversion produces the first figure. But if they are demonstrated per impossible, there will be still the first figure, because the false being assumed, a syllogism arises in the first figure. For example, in the last figure, if A and B are present with every C, it can be shown that A is present with some B. For if A is present with no B, but B is present with every C, A will be present with no C. But it was supposed that A was present with every C, and in like manner it will happen in other instances. It is also possible to reduce all syllogisms to universal syllogisms in the first figure. For those in the second, it is evident, are completed through these, yet not all in like manner, but the universal by conversion of the negative, and each of the particular by deduction per impossible. Now, particular syllogisms in the first figure are completed through themselves, but may in the second figure be demonstrated by deduction to the impossible. For example, if A is present with every B, but B with a certain C, it can be shown that A will be present with a certain C. For if A is present with no C, but is present with every B, B will be present with no C. For we know this by the second figure. So also will the demonstration be in the case of a negative. For if A is present with no B, but B is present with a certain C, A will not be present with a certain C, since if A is present with every C, and with no B, B will be present with no C, and this was the middle figure. Wherefore, as all syllogisms in the middle figure are reduced to universal syllogisms in the first figure, but particular in the first are reduced to those in the middle figure, it is clear that particular will be reduced to universal syllogisms in the first figure. Those, however, in the third, when the terms are universal, are immediately completed through those syllogisms. But when particular terms are assumed, they are completed through particular syllogisms in the first figure. But these, i.e. particulars, have been reduced to those, i.e. universals, so that also particular syllogisms in the third figure are reducible to the same. Wherefore it is evident that all can be reduced to universal syllogisms in the first figure. And we have therefore shown how syllogisms de in esse and de non in esse subsist, both those which are of the same figure with reference to themselves, and those which are of different figures, also with reference to each other. Chapter 8. Of syllogisms derived from two necessary propositions. Since, however, to exist necessarily, and to exist contingently are different, for many things exist, but not from necessity, and others neither necessarily, nor in short exist, yet may happen to exist, it is evident that there will be a different syllogism from each of these, and from the terms not being alike, but one syllogism will consist of those which are necessary, another of absolute, and a third of contingent. In necessary syllogisms it will almost always be the same, as in the case of absolute subsistences, for the terms being similarly placed in both absolute existence and in existing, or not of necessity, there will and there will not be a syllogism, except that there will be a difference in necessary or non-necessary subsistence being added to the terms. For a negative is in like manner convertible, and we assign similarly to be in the whole of a thing, and to be predicated of every. In the rest then it will be shown by the same manner through conversion that the conclusion is necessary, as in the case of being present. But in the middle figure, when the universal is affirmative, and the particular negative, and again in the third figure, when the universal is affirmative, but the particular negative, the demonstration will not be in the like manner. But it is necessary that proposing something with which either extreme is not present, we make a syllogism of this, for in respect of these there will be a necessary conclusion. If, on the other hand, in respect to the proposed term, there is a necessary conclusion, there will be also one, i.e., a necessary conclusion, of some individual of that term, for what is proposed is part of it, and each syllogism is formed under its own appropriate figure. Chapter 9. Of syllogisms, whereof one proposition is necessary, and the other pure in the first figure. It sometimes happens also that when one proposition is necessary, a necessary syllogism arises, not however from either proposition indifferently, but from the one that contains the greater extreme. For example, if A is assumed to be necessarily present or not present with B, but B to be alone present with C, for the premises being thus assumed, A will necessarily be present or not with C. For since A is or is not necessarily present with every B, but C is something belonging to B, C will evidently of necessity be one of these, i.e. will or will not be A. If again A, B, the major, is not necessary, but B, C, the minor, is necessary, there will not be a necessary conclusion, for if there be, it will happen that A is necessarily present with a certain B, both by the first and the third figure, but this is false, for B may happen to be a thing of that kind, that A may not be present with any thing of it. Besides, it is evident from the terms that there will not be a necessary conclusion, as if A were motion, B animal, and C man, for man is necessarily an animal, but neither are animal nor "man" necessarily "moved." So also if A B is negative, for there is the same demonstration. In particular syllogisms, however, if the universal is necessary, the conclusion will also be necessary, but if the particular be, there will not be a necessary conclusion, neither if the universal premise be negative nor affirmative. Let then, in the first place, the universal be necessary, and let A be necessarily present with every B, but B only be present with a certain C. It is necessary, therefore, that A should of necessity be present with a certain C, for C is under B, and A was of necessity present with every B. The same will occur if the syllogism be negative, for the demonstration will be the same. But if the particular be necessary, the conclusion will not be necessary, for nothing impossible results, as neither in universal syllogisms. A similar consequence will result also in negatives. Let the terms be "motion," "animal," "white." Example 1. Every animal is moved. It is necessary that something white should be an animal. Therefore, something white is moved. This is not necessary, for it might possibly not be moved. No animal is moved. It is necessary that something white should not be an animal. Therefore, something white is not moved. This is not necessary, because it may be moved. Chapter 10. Of the same in the second figure. In the second figure, if the negative premise be necessary, the conclusion will also be necessary, but if the affirmative be necessary, the conclusion will not be necessary. For first, let the negative be necessary, and let it not be possible for A to be in any B, but let it be present with C alone. As then a negative proposition may be converted, B cannot be present with any A, but A is with every C. Hence B cannot be present with any C, for C is under A. In like manner also, if the negative be added to C, for if A cannot be with any C, neither can C be present with any A, but A is with every B, so neither can C be present with any B, as the first figure will again be produced. Wherefore neither can B be present with C, since it is similarly converted. If, however, the affirmative premise be necessary, the conclusion will not be necessary, for let A necessarily be present with every B, and alone not be present with any C. Then the negative being converted, we have the first figure, but it was shown in the first that when the major negative proposition is not necessary, neither will the conclusion be necessary, so that neither in these will there be a necessary conclusion. Once more, if the conclusion is necessary, it results that C is not necessarily present with a certain A, for if B is necessarily present with no C, neither will C be necessarily present with any B, but B is present necessarily with a certain A. If A is necessarily present with every B, hence it is necessary that C should not be present with a certain A. There is, however, nothing to prevent such an A being assumed with which universally C may be present. Moreover, it can be shown by exposition of the terms that the conclusion is not simply necessary, but necessary from the assumption of these, e.g. let A be animal, B man, C white, and let the propositions be similarly assumed. For it is possible for an animal to be with nothing white, then neither will man be present with anything white, yet not from necessity, for it may happen for man to be white, yet not so long as animal is present with nothing white. So that from these assumptions there will be a necessary conclusion, but not simply necessary. The same will happen in particular syllogisms, for when the negative proposition is universal and necessary, the conclusion also will be necessary, but when the affirmative is universal and necessary, and the negative particular, the conclusion will not be necessary. First, then, let there be an universal and necessary negative, and let A not possibly be present with any B, but with a certain C. Since therefore a negative proposition is convertible, B can neither be possibly present with any A, but A is with a certain C, so that of necessity B is not present with a certain C. Again, let there be an universal and necessary affirmative, and let the affirmative be attached to B. If then A is necessarily present with every B, but is not with a certain C, B is not with a certain C, it is clear, yet not from necessity, since there will be the same terms for the demonstration, as were taken in the case of universal syllogisms. Neither, moreover, will the conclusion be necessary, if a particular necessary negative be taken as the demonstration is through the same terms. End of chapter 10 of book 1. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.